My mother-in-law offered to help with our finances. She already had access to my accounts. I was standing in the cereal aisle at Safeway when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe green. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Lauren Mitchell from Fraud Prevention at Pacific Northwest Credit Union. She asked if I'd recently authorized a wire transfer of $18,000 to an account in Nevada. My cart, half full of groceries I was buying for the week, suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I told her no, absolutely not, and she asked me to hold while she pulled up my account activity. The supermarket lights felt too bright. A kid was crying somewhere near the frozen foods. I stood there watching an old man compare cereal boxes while Lauren told me that over the past 4 months, someone had systematically drained nearly $43,000 from my checking and savings accounts through a series of transfers, online purchases, and cash withdrawals I'd never made. The floor didn't fall out from under me. Nothing dramatic happened. I just stood there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at a display of granola bars, trying to understand how my entire financial life had been gutted without me noticing. I'd been married to Rebecca for 3 years when her mother, Patricia, first offered to help us get our finances in order. We'd just bought our first house, a modest 3-bedroom in Tacoma that needed work, but had good bones, and between the mortgage, my student loans, and Rebecca's car payment, we were stretched thin. I worked as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant, solid middle-class income, nothing fancy. Rebecca taught 5th grade. We weren't struggling exactly, but we weren't comfortable either. Patricia had worked as a bank manager for 28 years before retiring, and she presented herself as someone who genuinely wanted to help her daughter and son-in-law build a secure future. She was 61, well-dressed, articulate, with the kind of confidence that comes from decades of professional success. She'd raised Rebecca as a single mother after her husband died when Rebecca was 7, and she wore that sacrifice like a badge of honor. Every conversation somehow circled back to what she'd given up, what she'd endured, how hard she'd worked to give Rebecca opportunities. I respected that. I genuinely did. So when she sat us down one Sunday afternoon in our kitchen, pulled out a leather portfolio full of financial planning worksheets, and offered to help us create a budget, track our spending, and maximize our savings, it seemed like a gift. Rebecca was thrilled. Her mother had always been good with money, she said. Patricia could see opportunities and strategies that normal people missed. The first few months were helpful, I'll admit that. Patricia came over every other Sunday. She'd review our bank statements, suggest areas where we could cut back, help us understand our credit card interest rates. She recommended we consolidate our accounts at her old credit union, where she still had connections, said she could get us better rates. We did it. She helped us set up automatic transfers to savings, showed us how to use budgeting software, even found us a better insurance rate. Rebecca was so happy to have her mother involved in our lives in a positive way. Their relationship had been complicated. Patricia was demanding, critical, prone to guilt trips. But this felt different. This felt like Patricia genuinely being helpful without the usual emotional manipulation. I wanted to believe that. Rebecca needed to believe it. So when Patricia casually mentioned that it would be easier for her to help us if she had login access to our online banking, I hesitated for maybe 10 seconds before agreeing. She was helping us for free, spending hours of her time, and she was a professional. It made sense. Rebecca added her as an authorized user on our accounts. Patricia promised she'd only look, only advise, never touch anything without asking. We trusted her. God help us. We trusted her. The first thing I noticed was small. We'd been planning to buy a new couch for months, saving up gradually, and one Saturday I logged in to check our balance before heading to a furniture store. We should have had about $2,100 in savings. The account showed $1,400. I stared at the screen, confused, then called Rebecca over. She pulled up her phone, checked her own login, and frowned. There had been a transfer the previous Wednesday, $700 moved from savings to checking. Neither of us remembered doing it. Rebecca called her mother. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice warm and reassuring. "Oh yes," she said. She'd moved that money to cover an overdraft that was about to hit our checking account. We'd been close to going negative, and she didn't want us to get hit with fees. She'd meant to tell us, but forgot. Rebecca thanked her, genuinely grateful, and I felt guilty for questioning it. Patricia was looking out for us. She'd saved us from an overdraft fee. The fact that neither of us remembered being close to overdraft seemed less important than her good intentions. I told myself to relax, to be more grateful, to trust the process. That was my first mistake. I should have checked every transaction right then. I should have asked for documentation. I should have changed the passwords immediately. But I didn't. I pushed the unease down and went to buy the couch. Over the next 2 months, it happened 3 more times. Small discrepancies. $50 here, $120 there, amounts that could be explained by forgotten purchases or overlooked automatic payments. Each time, Patricia had a reasonable explanation. She'd moved money to prevent overdrafts. She'd paid a bill we'd mentioned needing to pay. She'd transferred funds to take advantage of a brief interest rate window. Her explanations were detailed, professional, delivered with the absolute confidence of someone who'd spent 3 decades managing other people's money. Rebecca never questioned her. I questioned her once, gently, suggesting maybe we should approve transfers before Patricia made them, and the explosion was immediate. Patricia's voice went cold over the phone. After everything she'd done for us, all the hours she'd volunteered, we didn't trust her? She was trying to help us build a future, and we were accusing her of what, exactly? Stealing? From her own daughter? Rebecca was in tears, caught between her husband and her mother, and I backed down. I apologized. I said I didn't mean it that way. I said I appreciated everything Patricia was doing. The tension dissolved, but something changed. Patricia became more involved after that, not less. She called more often. She wanted to review our spending weekly instead of bi-weekly. She started making suggestions about bigger financial moves, talking about investment accounts and retirement planning. She was tightening her grip, though I didn't see it then. I just saw a woman who was maybe a little controlling but genuinely wanted to help. The day the fraud investigator called me in Safeway, I drove straight home. Rebecca was at school, wouldn't be back until 4. I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop and started going through 4 months of bank statements line by line. What I found made my hands shake so badly, I had to stop twice to breathe. The pattern was methodical, almost elegant in its construction. Patricia had started small, moving money between our accounts in ways that seemed helpful or explained. Then she'd gradually escalated. $50 withdrawn at an ATM I'd never been to. A $100 transfer to an account I didn't recognize, labeled as a bill payment. $200 paid to a credit card that wasn't ours. The amounts grew slowly, carefully, staying just below the threshold where we'd notice immediately. She'd scattered the transactions across weeks, mixing them with legitimate activity. Some months, she'd taken $300. Other months, $2,000. She'd hidden it all in plain sight, and because we trusted her, because she was family, because she was the one helping us track our finances, we'd never looked closely. She'd weaponized our trust. The $18,000 wire transfer that triggered the fraud alert was different, though. That was bold. That was endgame. I think she'd gotten comfortable, confident that we'd never question her, and she'd gotten greedy. I called Rebecca. She was in the middle of a lesson, but I told her it was an emergency. She called back during her lunch break, and I explained everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then she said, very quietly, that there had to be an explanation. Her mother wouldn't do that. There was a mistake. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the need to believe that her mother, the woman who'd raised her alone, who'd sacrificed everything, wasn't capable of stealing from us. I told her I was looking at the statements right now, that I'd already talked to the bank, that the evidence was undeniable. Rebecca started crying. She said she needed to call her mother to hear her side. I told her not to, not yet, but she'd already hung up. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Patricia. Her voice was different than I'd ever heard it, flat, hard. She said that Rebecca had told her about my accusations, and she wanted me to know that she was deeply hurt. She'd done nothing but try to help us, and now I was repaying her kindness with paranoia and slander. She demanded to know exactly what transactions I was questioning. I started listing them, dates and amounts, and she had an answer for every single one. That ATM withdrawal was to get cash for groceries because our card had been declined. That transfer was to pay a utility bill we'd forgotten. That payment was to cover an emergency expense. Her voice never wavered. She sounded absolutely certain, and for a moment, I felt myself doubting. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there were explanations. Then she said something that cut through the fog. She said if I continued making these accusations, she'd have no choice but to explain to Rebecca how I'd been hiding my own spending, how I'd been lying about money, how I was trying to blame her for my own financial irresponsibility. It was a threat, clear and cold. That's when I knew for certain. I called the credit union back and asked to speak to a supervisor. I got connected to a man named Richard Bartlett, who'd been with the fraud department for 12 years. I explained the situation, that an authorized user on my account had been making unauthorized transactions, that I had evidence of systematic theft, that the person was my mother-in-law. Richard listened without interrupting, then asked me to come into the branch the next morning with every piece of documentation I could gather. He said they'd need to freeze the accounts, open a formal investigation, and potentially file a report with law enforcement. He used words like embezzlement and elder abuse statutes, though the statutes didn't apply because I wasn't elderly. He said that because Patricia was an authorized user, the legal situation was complicated. She technically had permission to access the accounts, which meant proving theft would require demonstrating that she'd exceeded her authorized use. I felt my stomach drop. He was saying she might get away with it. Richard sensed my panic and said not to worry yet, that they'd seen cases like this before, that the pattern of behavior I was describing usually constituted fraud, even with authorized access. He told me to document everything, to save every email and text from Patricia, to not delete anything. He said the most important thing was to remove her access immediately and change all my passwords. I did that while still on the phone with him. I logged into every account we had and purged Patricia's access, watching her name disappear from the authorized users list. It felt like locking a door after a robbery. Too late, but necessary. Rebecca came home that evening and wouldn't look at me. She'd talked to her mother for over an hour, and Patricia had convinced her that this was all a misunderstanding, that I was overreacting, that the bank had made errors. Rebecca wanted to believe her mother more than she wanted to believe me, and I understood why. Accepting what I was saying meant accepting that her mother, the person who'd raised her, who she'd admired her entire life, was a thief who'd been systematically stealing from her own daughter. That's a hard reality to swallow. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Patricia had first offered to help us, and I showed Rebecca the statements. I walked her through every questionable transaction, showed her the ATM withdrawal locations that were nowhere near our house or work, showed her the credit card payments going to accounts we didn't own. Rebecca's face went pale. She tried to argue, suggesting maybe Patricia had taken cash out for us and forgotten to mention it. Maybe she'd paid bills on our behalf, but her arguments got weaker with each statement. Finally, she just put her head in her hands and cried. She said she needed to talk to her mother again, to give her a chance to explain with the evidence in front of her. I told her that was a mistake, that Patricia would just manufacture more lies, but Rebecca insisted. She called her mother while I sat there. Patricia answered, and Rebecca started asking about specific transactions. I could hear Patricia's voice through the phone, sharp and defensive. She was angry now, not hurt. She demanded to know why Rebecca was interrogating her, said that if we didn't trust her, then maybe she should just step back from our lives entirely, said that she was tired of being treated like a criminal when all she'd done was help. Rebecca tried to stay calm, tried to ask specific questions, but Patricia talked over her. Then Patricia said something that made Rebecca's face go white. She said that if we pursued this, if we went to the bank or the police, she'd make sure everyone knew what kind of man I really was, that she had information about me that would destroy my marriage and my career. It was pure bluff. She had nothing, but the threat was clear. Rebecca ended the call. She looked at me with tears streaming down her face and said, we had to go to the police. We filed a report the next morning at the Tacoma Police Department. The officer who took our statement was Detective Angela Reeves, a woman in her early 50s with gray-streaked hair and tired eyes who'd seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. She listened to our story, examined the bank statements I'd brought, and asked pointed questions about Patricia's access, her explanations, and her threats. She said that cases involving family members were always complicated because juries sympathized with family dynamics and defense attorneys exploited that sympathy. She said that what we were describing sounded like theft by unauthorized control of property, a felony in Washington state, but that proving it would require demonstrating that Patricia had exceeded her authorized access with intent to deprive us of our property. The fact that she'd made threats suggested consciousness of guilt, which was helpful. Detective Reeves said she'd need to interview Patricia, review the bank records, and potentially subpoena Patricia's financial records to track where the money had gone. She warned us that this would get ugly, that Patricia would likely hire an attorney, that family members would take sides. She asked if we were prepared for that. Rebecca nodded, though I could see she was barely holding herself together. Detective Reeves took copies of everything we'd brought, gave us a case number, and said she'd be in touch within a week. We left the station feeling like we'd done something, but also feeling exposed, like we'd just kicked a hornet's nest and were waiting for the swarm. Patricia called Rebecca 38 times over the next 3 days. Rebecca didn't answer. Patricia left voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to angry accusations to threats of suicide. She sent text messages claiming she'd taken the money to protect us, that she'd been planning to pay it back, that she'd invested it on our behalf, and the returns would make us wealthy. The stories kept changing, contradicting each other, each version more desperate than the last. On the 4th day, Patricia showed up at Rebecca's school during her planning period. The school secretary called Rebecca to the office, where Patricia was waiting in the lobby, looking smaller and older than I'd ever seen her. Rebecca told me later that her mother grabbed her hands and begged her to drop the police investigation, said it was all a misunderstanding, said she'd pay back every penny if Rebecca would just make the investigation go away. Rebecca asked her where the money was. Patricia said it was tied up in investments, that she'd taken it to help us, that she'd been planning to surprise us. Rebecca asked her which investments. Patricia couldn't answer. She just kept saying she'd done it out of love, that she'd never meant to hurt anyone. Rebecca told her to leave. Patricia refused. The principal had to escort her out of the building, and the school filed a trespass warning. Rebecca came home that day and told me she was done, that whatever relationship she'd had with her mother was over, that she finally saw Patricia clearly for the first time. Detective Reeves called me on a Friday afternoon, 9 days after we'd filed the report. She'd interviewed Patricia, who'd shown up with an attorney named Douglas Fletcher, a criminal defense lawyer with a decent reputation. Patricia had denied any wrongdoing, claimed that all the transactions were authorized by us, either explicitly or implicitly, through our general authorization for her to help with our finances. Fletcher had provided a signed document, something Patricia had apparently had us sign months ago, that granted her broad authority to manage our accounts for the purpose of financial planning. I didn't remember signing it, but there it was, my signature and Rebecca's, on a form titled Financial Management Authorization Agreement. Detective Reeves said it complicated things legally, but didn't eliminate the charges. The pattern of withdrawals and transfers, combined with Patricia's changing explanations and her threats, still constituted theft. The question was whether the prosecutor's office would take the case. She said she'd forward everything to the county prosecutor and recommend charges. She also said I should expect things to get worse before they got better. She was right. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from Douglas Fletcher threatening a defamation lawsuit if I continued making false accusations against Patricia. The letter claimed I'd destroyed Patricia's reputation, damaged her emotional well-being, and caused her to seek medical treatment for stress-related health issues. It demanded a public apology and full retraction of our police report, or they'd pursue civil litigation. I forwarded the letter to Detective Reeves, who said it was a standard intimidation tactic and to ignore it. The bank investigation moved faster than the police investigation. Richard Bartlett called me 3 weeks after my initial report to say they'd completed their review. They'd identified $43,618 in unauthorized transactions over a 4-month period. They'd frozen Patricia's accounts at the credit union, she was still a member, and flagged her for fraud. He said they'd be filing a suspicious activity report with federal banking regulators, and that they were recommending the credit union pursue criminal charges separately from our police report. He also said they'd be refunding most of the stolen money to our accounts within 30 days, though we'd need to pay back anything we couldn't prove was stolen. I felt a wave of relief so intense I had to sit down. We were going to get our money back. We weren't ruined. Richard said not to celebrate yet, that Patricia would likely challenge the refund, that her attorney would argue she had authorization, but that the bank's fraud department had seen the pattern and made their determination. He said their decision was independent of any criminal charges, based purely on their internal review. I thanked him, hung up, and told Rebecca. She cried again, but this time from relief. The prosecutor's office took 2 months to decide whether to file charges. During that time, Patricia waged a campaign to turn Rebecca's extended family against us. She called Rebecca's aunts, uncles, and cousins, told them we were ungrateful and vindictive, said she'd only tried to help and we'd repaid her by trying to send her to prison. Some family members believed her. Others stayed neutral. A few reached out to Rebecca privately to say they believed us, that they'd always known Patricia was controlling and manipulative, that they weren't surprised. Rebecca's Aunt Diane, her mother's younger sister, told Rebecca that Patricia had stolen from her too, years ago, but that she'd never reported it because she didn't want to tear the family apart. She said she regretted that now, that maybe if she'd held Patricia accountable then, we wouldn't be going through this now. The family fractures were painful. Rebecca lost relationships with cousins she'd been close to, people who accused her of betraying her mother. But she also formed deeper connections with family members who'd been waiting for someone to finally call out Patricia's behavior. It was a strange sorting, watching people choose sides based on old loyalties and old wounds. On a Wednesday in late September, I got a call from Deputy Prosecutor Natalie Ortiz from the Pierce County Prosecutor's Office. She'd been assigned our case and wanted to meet with us to discuss whether to file charges. We went to her office the next day, a cramped space filled with case files and legal books. Natalie was in her mid-30s, sharp and direct, with a reputation for taking financial crimes seriously. She'd reviewed the police report, the bank's findings, and the documentation we'd provided. She said she believed we had a strong case for second-degree theft, a Class C felony in Washington, based on the amount stolen and the pattern of behavior. The challenge, she said, was that Patricia's attorney would argue authorized access. They'd claim Patricia genuinely believed she had permission to manage the money, that her financial planning services included making transactions, that any misunderstandings were civil matters, not criminal ones. Natalie said she could overcome that argument with evidence of Patricia's threats, her changing explanations, and the fact that she'd hidden many transactions from us. She said the strongest evidence was the wire transfer that triggered the bank's fraud alert. $18,000 sent to an account in Nevada that Patricia claimed was an investment opportunity, but that turned out to be her own secondary account. That showed criminal intent. Natalie said if we were willing to testify, if we were prepared for trial, she'd file charges. Rebecca looked at me. I looked at her. We both nodded. Natalie said she'd file within the week. Patricia was arraigned on October 3rd. The charge was theft in the second degree. She pleaded not guilty, posted bail, and walked out of the courthouse looking defiant. Her attorney gave a statement to a local news reporter who'd somehow gotten wind of the case, saying this was a tragic misunderstanding, that Patricia had devoted her life to helping her daughter, and that the criminal justice system was being weaponized for a family dispute. The story ran that evening on a local news site under the headline, "Former bank manager accused of stealing from family." It didn't mention our names, but everyone who knew us could figure it out. My coworkers asked me about it. Rebecca's principal pulled her aside to make sure she was okay. We became local gossip. I hated it. Rebecca hated it worse. But we'd chosen this path, and there was no turning back. Discovery began, which meant both sides exchanging evidence. Natalie subpoenaed Patricia's financial records and found that she'd deposited our money into her own accounts, used it to pay her mortgage, her car payment, her credit cards. Some of it she'd gambled away at a casino. Some she'd spent on luxury purchases, designer handbags, jewelry, a weekend trip to Vegas. She'd been living beyond her retirement income and using our money to maintain her lifestyle. When confronted with this evidence during a deposition, Patricia claimed she'd always intended to pay us back, that she'd been borrowing, not stealing. Her attorney tried to frame it as a loan between family members that had gone wrong. Natalie destroyed that argument by pointing out that loans require disclosure and agreement, neither of which had occurred. Patricia had never told us she was taking money. She'd hidden it. That wasn't a loan. That was theft. The trial was set for January. The months leading up to it were brutal. Patricia hired a private investigator who showed up at my workplace, asking my co-workers questions about my character and my marriage. She was looking for dirt, anything she could use to discredit me. She found nothing, but the harassment was constant. Patricia sent Rebecca a letter claiming she had cancer and only months to live, begging Rebecca to drop the charges so she could die in peace. Rebecca called Patricia's doctor. We'd found his information in old papers Patricia had given us, and he confirmed she had no cancer diagnosis. It was another lie. Patricia also tried to contact our mortgage lender, our insurance company, anyone connected to our finances, claiming she was helping us and needed access. We had to place fraud alerts on everything. It was exhausting, constantly defending against someone who was supposed to be family. Rebecca started seeing a therapist, Dr. Monica Hernandez, who specialized in family trauma. Dr. Hernandez helped Rebecca process the betrayal, the grief of losing her mother, and the guilt she felt for prosecuting her. The therapist said that what Patricia had done was financial abuse, a form of domestic violence, and that Rebecca was a victim, not a villain. That reframed everything for Rebecca. She'd been carrying shame, feeling like she was the bad daughter for turning in her mother. Dr. Hernandez helped her see that protecting yourself from abuse isn't betrayal, it's survival. The trial lasted 4 days. Natalie called Rebecca and me as witnesses first. We testified about trusting Patricia, about giving her access to help us, about discovering the theft. Patricia's attorney, Fletcher, tried to make me look paranoid and controlling during cross-examination, suggesting I'd manufactured the fraud allegations because I wanted to cut Patricia out of our lives. I stayed calm, stuck to the facts, and let the evidence speak. Natalie called Richard Bartlett from the bank, who explained the fraud investigation and the pattern of unauthorized transactions. She called Detective Reeves, who testified about Patricia's changing explanations and threats. She called a forensic accountant named James Wu, who'd traced every dollar Patricia had taken and shown where it went. Mortgage payments, casino deposits, luxury purchases, cash withdrawals. The accountant's testimony was devastating. He showed charts and timelines that made Patricia's theft look exactly like what it was: systematic, intentional, and sustained. Fletcher tried to argue that Patricia had genuinely believed she was helping us, that her financial planning services had included discretion to move money, but the evidence contradicted him at every turn. Patricia herself didn't testify. Fletcher advised against it, probably because he knew Natalie would eviscerate her on cross-examination. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. 6. They came back with a guilty verdict on all counts. Rebecca sobbed when the verdict was read. I just felt numb. Sentencing happened 3 weeks later. Patricia faced up to 5 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Natalie argued for significant prison time, citing the breach of trust, the amount stolen, and Patricia's complete lack of remorse. Fletcher argued for probation, citing Patricia's age, her lack of criminal history, and her years of service as a bank manager. The judge, a woman named Carolyn Fisher, who'd been on the bench for 18 years, was not sympathetic. She said that Patricia had exploited her position of trust, that she'd weaponized her professional expertise to steal from her own family, and that her behavior after being caught, the lies, the threats, the harassment, showed a disturbing lack of moral character. Judge Fisher sentenced Patricia to 30 months in prison and ordered her to pay full restitution of $43,618, plus court costs. Patricia showed no emotion when the sentence was read. She just stared straight ahead, stone-faced, as the bailiff led her away. Rebecca and I walked out of the courtroom into cold February rain. We didn't say anything. We just stood there, letting the rain soak us, feeling like we'd survived something terrible, but were forever changed by it. The aftermath was quiet in some ways, chaotic in others. Patricia served 18 months before being released on parole. She never spoke to us again, never apologized, never acknowledged what she'd done. Some of Rebecca's family members reconciled with us, admitting they'd been wrong to doubt us. Others never spoke to us again, choosing loyalty to Patricia over truth. Rebecca and I started the slow work of rebuilding our financial security and our sense of trust. We closed all our old accounts and opened new ones at a different bank. We changed our passwords, set up fraud alerts, and learned to manage our own finances without help. Rebecca continued therapy and worked through the grief of losing her mother, or rather, of realizing she'd never really had the mother she thought she had. I went back to work, focused on being steady and present, tried not to think about the $43,000 that had been stolen from us, or the year of our lives that had been consumed by police reports and court dates and family drama. A year after the trial, Rebecca and I were sitting in our living room on the new couch we'd finally been able to buy when the money was refunded. She was grading papers. I was reading. And she looked up and said something I'll never forget. She said that her mother had taught her the most important lesson of her life, just not the one Patricia intended. She said she'd learned that trust has to be earned, not assumed. That family doesn't excuse betrayal. That sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most capable of hurting you. And that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. I asked her if she regretted reporting Patricia to the police. She thought about it for a long time, then said no. She said that letting Patricia get away with it would have taught her that she didn't deserve protection, that family loyalty meant accepting abuse. She said pressing charges was the first time in her life she'd chosen herself over her mother's expectations, and that even though it hurt, it was the right thing to do. I told her I was proud of her. She said she was proud of us both. Sometimes I still think about that day in the Safeway cereal aisle when the fraud investigator called, how my whole world tilted in the space of a phone call, how I'd stood there with a cart full of groceries I never bought, trying to understand how someone we trusted had systematically dismantled our financial security while pretending to help us build it. I think about all the red flags I ignored, all the times I rationalized away my suspicions, because confronting them meant confronting an ugly truth. I think about how easy it is to steal from people when they trust you, how trust is both the most valuable thing we have and the most dangerous thing we give away. Patricia taught me that. She also taught me that some people view kindness as weakness, that they interpret trust as permission, and that they'll take everything you have if you let them. I didn't let her. Rebecca didn't let her. We fought back, and we won. The cost was high. Family relationships destroyed, a year of our lives consumed by legal battles, emotional scars that will probably never fully heal. But we got justice. We got our money back. We got our lives back. And Patricia got what she deserved. She told everyone she was trying to help us. The truth is, she was helping herself. The only difference is that eventually, everyone knew it. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.